Okay, in this lesson we're taking a look at an Oscar Peterson melody transcription on Take the A Train. This is from an Oscar Peterson trio recording called Oscar Peterson Plays the Duke Ellington Songbook. Really important that you check out the transcription with the recording. It's really important to connect to how it actually sounds. The main thing I want to look at in this lesson here with this transcription is the comping language. Now you'd figure, why are we looking at a trio recording for comping language? Wouldn't we want to look at, Oscar comping for a horn or somebody? Well, actually, the phrasing of this tune is set up perfectly. There's these 2-bar melodic phrases with 2 bars of rest. And that's where Oscar is doing a lot of these comping fills, where he's sort of comping in a call and response type fashion along with the melody. So I bet if he was playing for a horn, he'd do a lot of similar fills in here. But in general, there's so many great things to take away with this, and not just the comping language, but that's the main thing I want to prioritize here. So let's start from the very top. Okay, a few noteworthy things there. First, we noticed, and you notice I played this with my right hand. Now it's arguable whether he might have gotten that with his left hand, but I'm sure because of playing this so quickly afterwards and the positioning of the melody with the comping, he likely just played this with his right hand. Now what's noteworthy comping-wise there is the Charleston rhythm, and this is frequent throughout the whole transcription. You'll see that he uses this a lot. In the Charleston rhythm, typically it's 1 in the and of 2. This is the same rhythm, it's just shifted over a couple beats. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and. Right? So it's on 3 in the and of 4. Then he follows that up with a common Oscarism. This is a left-hand device that he would do often, where he pedals the 5. Normally he does that during the 5 chord itself. In this case, this tune is in C major, so you'd expect him to do this on G7. But he actually does this in the midst of the 1 chord, in the midst of C major 7. And he would often do this grace note before. Right? Moving on. Okay, really great comping fill right there. What's happening harmonically is he starts with this D7 sharp 11 voicing. And each note in this movement, he just brings up by a whole tone. He's using the whole tone scale. And each note just moves up a whole step. F sharp moves to G sharp, C moves to D, E moves to F sharp, G sharp moves to A sharp, right? And so on. G sharp moves to A sharp, D moves to E, F sharp moves to G sharp, A sharp moves to C, and so on. So that's where he's getting these voicings from, and it's in this kind of positioning where you have a voicing greater than an octave. So you have an open voicing, and that works great in this context. Rhythmically, also, this is noteworthy. He starts out with a series of eighth notes. He goes and 4 and then it's just a series of upbeats from there. And 4 and, right? So really emphasizing those upbeats. Okay, and there again we have that same Charleston rhythm just shifted over 2 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, and. Okay, and he adds this chord rather than just going D minor 7, G7. He actually does D7 altered to G7. But when he goes to G7, he doesn't play the typical G7 rootless voicing. For melodic purposes, he keeps that F up top. Right, so rather than going down to the 13, which is the typical rootless voicing for G7, he keeps this F on top, and since he has the F here, he doesn't repeat it again down here. So he goes. Okay, and we have a really cool comping rhythm there, comping fill. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and. Okay, so he balances those downbeats by ending on 2 eighth notes. So he goes 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and. And harmonically, with his voicings, what's taking place, he's throwing in a passing chord here, right? So this is during what's typically a 1 chord and then a 2/5. So rather than just staying on C major for the whole bar, he throws in this A7 altered as a passing chord. He makes it basically a 1-6-2-5. So he throws A7 altered, and then he just does, he moves down chromatically. So D minor actually becomes D7, and here he does G7 altered. You could also think about this as an E flat 7, a D7, a D flat 7, right? They're the same thing, whether you think of it as A7 altered, D7, G7 altered, or if you think of it as just E flat 7, D7, D flat 7. Okay? Now moving on here to the second A. Okay? So his fill here is really cool. It's using the same fourth structure as he just used a moment ago. So with these voicings, right, he's basically using fourths. So that's where in his left hand he has third and seventh, but with his right hand he's harmonizing this in fourths. Now during the C major, it's all fourths from the bottom up. So this is a great C major voicing right here. More specifically a C6-9, because there's actually no seventh. But this fourths, this is something that actually McCoy Tyner made famous, but it goes to show you, even before McCoy did this, people like Oscar would do this as well. And it's a more harmonically open sound, and it really frees up, when you're comping for somebody else, it frees up the soloist a lot of times. So it's 3-6-9-5 root. But then what he does is what we refer to as chromatic planing. Okay? So he creates motion by just doing some chromatic motion. Okay? So he goes up, and then below the chord, and then lands back at that target chord. And the rhythm is all eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, right? So he ends on that and of 4. Okay, here we notice it's the same fill idea as in the first A section. It's just a different comping rhythm. So same voicing, same harmonic concept. He starts with the same voicing and goes up, moving each degree up by a note in the whole tone scale. But it's all upbeats. And again, we notice same idea there. In measure 13, we have the same idea as in measure 5. The question is, what's different? Okay, it's the same rhythm, right? It's the same Charleston rhythm delayed by 2 beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, and. Voicing-wise, he throws in that D7 altered, substituting that D minor 7. But then he does that standard G7 voicing. Okay. And there we have some nice uses of chord notes. And you notice throughout this transcription, we have a balance of some upbeat rhythms and some downbeat rhythms, right? That balance really, I find, is what really makes the music swinging. And here with this particular comping rhythm, we start out with 2 chord notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then the last 2 is the Charleston rhythm. 1, 2, and. Harmonically, he starts with G minor 7. And he's anticipating the next measure, because in this measure it's C major 7, and then we have a 2-5 into F major 7. So that 2-5 in F major 7 starts with the G minor 7. And then he does a chromatic approach from above into the C7. Now, into the bridge. So what's happening there is he's using drop 2 movement. Okay, so he starts on this F major as a drop 2. Okay, takes the second voice from the top, brings it down an octave. And then each note is simply descending by a degree in the scale. If you think of the F major scale, C moves to B flat, F moves to E, A moves to G, E moves to D. Right? And if you keep on going, Now where it changes is this next chord here. This is where he starts to throw in some movement. This is what Barry Harris would often refer to as the sixth diminished scale, which is throwing in basically a C7 flat 9, a 5-to-1 movement to F6 here, right? So if you harmonize that the whole scale, you would get something like that. So he starts to throw it in, not from the very beginning, but right there, and then he ends on an A7, right? And that A7 is basically a passing chord to lead to the D7, this A7 altered right here. Again, you could also think of this as E flat 7, it's tritone sub. Whether you think of it as an E flat 7 chromatic approach to D7 or an A7 altered 5-1, it's the same thing. And notice he shifts back to closed position too. So he was in drop 2 in an open kind of voicing, and it shifts back to drop 2 here. Okay, right there we notice the Charleston rhythm again, shifted over by 2 beats. Okay, and harmonically, he's doing another 5-1. So this is A7 and then D7 guide tones. So simple voicings here, just drop 2 voice leading from a D minor into G7, and for his G7 rootless he decides to go flat 9 and keeping the 13 up top. And some nice ornamentation here leading back into the melody, because usually the melody there is just but over the G7 he decides to use that flat 9 and sharp 9, 1, 2, and 3, and triple at 1. Okay. Now measure 25, the last A section here. Okay. Here we have some interesting motion over the C major 7. He starts with a drop 2, then he goes close voicing, right, like block chord sort of double lead, and then he goes from, this is basically like a C major 9, right? Then he goes to C6 here, right? So he's not doing 5-1, he's not adding a passing, the passing chord is not a different chord. It's the same chord, it's the same idea of C major, but it's just shifting around the voices a little bit from C major 9 to C6. And there we see that pedal grace note again. Okay. So we notice there the same comping idea as far as harmonic approach and voicings, but again the rhythm is different. But you may recognize this rhythm because this is the same comping rhythm as in measure 7. So in measure 7 that was the end of the first A. But here it's over the D7. So we have those 4 chord notes which ends with 2 eighth notes. Okay, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. One interesting thing on top of that is also, if you notice in the left hand, just a subtle detail here. He actually creates some syncopation by adding an extra note with the left hand. So he goes 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3. And that extra note is basically pedaling off of the previous degree in that whole tone scale. So here he starts with this voicing. When he gets to this with G sharp on the bottom, his 8th note is going back to that F sharp. And once he's at the C, his extra note is going back to that B flat. Okay, and there, what do we see? Measure 29, we see that same Charleston rhythm again. So So in all three occurrences where this happens, in each of the A sections, A1, A2, A3, we see that Charleston starting on beat 3, 3 in the and of 4. The harmonic approach is different this time. Here he doesn't throw in the D7 altered like he did in the previous times. Here he does just a regular D minor rootless voicing, D minor 9. Then he goes to a G13 with a flat 9 here. And then that leads into the solo break and into the solo. So something that I think would be very interesting to do with this is to do what I call a visual stacking analysis. Now what that is since we have these reoccurring sections here, A1, A2, and A3 have some reoccurring sections. The cadence, the last two bars of each A section is slightly different because the last A section is a solo break, so there is no comping fills there. The first A, it ends on the 5, and the second A, it's modulating to the new key, to F major for the bridge. So the last two bars is going to be different. But there's 3 sections, measure 1 and 2 of the A's, measure 3 and 4 of the A's, and measure 5 going to measure 6 of the A's, where it would be interesting to stack these on top of each other and visually observe what the similarities and differences are in approach, in comping rhythms, in harmonic approach, in specific voicings. Okay, so you'll notice on the last page of the PDF, I have a visual stacking analysis of those 3 sections. Okay, so section 1, which is measure 1 and 2, the first A. Okay, the second A. Right, the last A. So you notice there's some differences there in terms of the comping fills, right? The second A in particular was doing those fourths. The first A was the simplest, just with that Charleston rhythm there on 3 and the and of 4. But both the first A and the third A, you noticed, in measure 2 he threw in this left-hand 5 pedal on the and of 1. Okay. Section 2, measure 3 and 4, is the first A. The second A, the third A. Okay, so what do we notice there is that the voicings and the harmonic approach is the same thing for all the A's. The thing that's different there is the comping rhythms. The first A, he starts out with 3 eighth notes and then goes into a series of upbeats. The second A is all upbeats. And the third A is the complete opposite. It's actually all downbeats except for the end. He ends on an upbeat. And section 3, measure 5 going to measure 6, so D minor going to G7, we see the same comping rhythm each of the times. 3 in the and of 4. That Charleston shifted over to beat 3, first A, second A. Right, so there, difference in the voicing, right? Both of those start out with that D7 altered instead of D minor 7, but the G7 is slightly different. The first A, he keeps his F on top for melodic purposes. The second A, he goes to the standard G7 rootless voicing, and the third A, it's the regular D minor rootless voicing into a different G7 voicing here, interestingly a G13 flat 9. So this visual stacking analysis is really helpful just to see, just to compare, how Oscar approaches this. But lots of great comping language in general to take from this transcription. So I hope this analysis is helpful. Enjoy. I'll see you in the next lesson. Bijan Tagavi here. Thanks so much for checking out this sample clip from my exclusive lesson library for my private correspondence students. To come on board, email me. We can set up a free Zoom session. I can tell you all about it. Or click on the link in the description below to read more about my personalized correspondence lessons. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for the YouTube algorithms.